detective stared at the busted SUV under flickering lights, and the street felt frozen around him. Folks whispered near the yellow tape, speaking the name Preme in low voices that carried strange weight. Nobody knew the whole chain of moves that pushed Queens toward this scene, yet everyone sensed a long road behind it. Old tensions hung in the air like smoke rising from nearby rooftops. This night felt connected to choices made decades earlier, long before bullets touched metal. Everything pointed backward toward one boy who learned the block faster than anyone expected. His past started far from this crime scene, deep inside Baisley Projects, where legends were shaped. South Jamaica in the late 1960s carried a rhythm that felt heavy yet alive, with every building holding stories that stacked higher than those brick walls. Crowded courtyards echoed with kids playing tag near stairwells, where older teens traded jokes and secrets with a quick confidence. Families tried to stretch small paychecks across long weeks, while the blocks never slept fully due to the constant movement that shaped the neighborhood spirit. Street vendors pushed carts down Guy R. Brewer Boulevard as city buses rolled past groups of men leaning near corner stores. Baisley Park houses stood right in the middle of that world, and the buildings formed a maze that every kid learned step by step. Kenneth McGriff walked those pathways with sharp eyes that studied details other kids ignored. Folks around him worked hard to stay afloat, while young homies chased small wins to feel some pride in neighborhoods that offered limited opportunities. Those project hallways taught lessons without teachers standing nearby, so each stairway conversation built another layer of neighborhood logic. During the early 1970s, hustlers moved through South Jamaica in waves that shaped the environment around every playground. Some men pushed heroin across those streets, and others worked small card games near laundromats that stayed open late. Kenneth watched them carefully, his quiet presence masking his curiosity. He learned how handshakes carried hidden meanings, as well as how older dudes protected their spots with disciplined patience that impressed him. Even as a kid, he noticed which hustlers kept their cool heads under pressure. Teenage cliques dominated several blocks, forming loose groups that traveled together for safety and reputation. Some rolled with tough attitudes and flashy clothes, stepping out with confidence built on small hustles that kept dollars inside their pockets. Kenneth grew up around those figures, absorbing their movements with steady awareness. He learned that influence flowed to those who understood people, along with patterns better than the loudest voices in the crowd. His early years were shaped by constant observation, rather than reckless action. Poverty crept through Baisley Projects with a steady force that left families juggling overdue bills and limited resources. Mothers pushed their sons towards school and warned them about dangerous circles gathering near the basketball courts. Kids often heard sirens. They also witnessed arguments spark near building entrances, where tensions flared without warning. Kenneth navigated that environment with discipline gained from watching how quick decisions shaped entire days for everyone around him. During his teenage years, the 5% Nation held a growing presence in South Jamaica, giving young men philosophies that explained life through symbolic lessons. Kenneth was drawn into that world, studying supreme mathematics as well as coded language that shaped his early thinking. Those teachings offered a structure that sharpened his communication skills while teaching him how information held power. The coded alphabet intrigued him and influenced his approach toward future organizing. That knowledge gave him tools that many older street figures never mastered. Baisley's older teens experimented with hustles that ranged from flipping small goods to running errands for neighborhood dealers who trusted sharp young runners. Kenneth joined minor tasks that barely paid but offered access to information he valued. He carried messages, watched the corners, and listened to conversations unfolding near benches where street elders discussed money and survival. None of those early hustles involved heavy crimes, yet each task taught him timing, patience, as well as awareness that molded his mindset. Ambition took form within him slowly once he grasped how ordered systems governed each profitable block. Kenneth favored structure over chaos, yet respected seasoned figures who imposed order without lifting their voices. He examined alliance formation, plus the way loyalty bound crews together under pressure. Those early lessons planted seeds that eventually matured into strategies few teens ever imagined. Kenneth cultivated a steady presence, allowing him to fade into loud or quiet settings alike. Friends noticed his knack for listening without interruption and for spotting subtle details others missed. He seldom reacted fast, preferring instead to collect clues before speaking aloud. Such patience gained him trust among slightly older teens who valued someone grasping nuance rather than pursuing reckless attention blindly today. Local kids understood which rooftops hosted lookouts by night, plus which staircases remained safe during busy afternoons. Kenneth treated the whole project like a study map, tracking movement cycles, shaping daily life around him. He observed families wielding influence within each building, plus corners hosting quick deals after dusk. Such observations never felt random curiosity. They built a mental blueprint, later guiding him forward with intention once he stepped deeper into those same streets nearby alone again. During the late 1970s, South Jamaica shifted again as crime rates rose across New York City. New tensions arose from crews operating across nearby neighborhoods. Conversations among adults centered on rising costs, layoffs, and increased police presence on certain blocks. Kenneth watched older hustlers adjust their patterns to avoid unwanted attention. He realized that knowledge helped them survive more effectively than violence. Music blasted from apartment windows, soul tracks mixing with early hip-hop beats that energized weekend gatherings. Those sounds shaped the culture that young Southside kids embraced with pride. Kenneth moved through those scenes with an ease born of a complete understanding of his surroundings. As the decade closed, a new substance was prepared to change the entire neighborhood landscape. Crack cocaine moved quietly through nearby boroughs, creating profits that multiplied fast and pulled hustlers into a level of activity the city had never witnessed. Rumors spread about fortunes made overnight and corners turning into high traffic zones. Kenneth watched these developments with interest as he prepared to step into the next phase of his life. The environment around him braced for a transformation that would define a generation and eventually elevate his name far beyond the courtyard walls he grew up beside. South Jamaica entered the early 1980s carrying tension that grew stronger each month as crack cocaine slipped into New York City's corners. The substance moved through Queens quickly and created profits that shocked even veteran hustlers who thought they understood street economics. Word spread across Baisley Projects about dealers in Brooklyn earning stacks daily. That news pushed young kids in Queens to study every move those rising dealers made. Kenneth McGriff watched that shift unfold with calm interest while moving through Baisley's crowded courtyards. He recognized potential sitting directly before him, choosing to gather teens who genuinely respected his judgment. Many of those boys already followed 5% Nation lessons, trusting coded teachings that quietly strengthened beliefs. Kenneth saw leadership potential within them, believing they could operate together with a focus rare among neighborhood groups. He selected individuals who listened closely, carrying themselves with a seriousness that quietly impressed him. Some were young 5%ers fluent in the language of supreme mathematics. Others were friends from nearby buildings who trusted Kenneth because of his steady demeanor. He wanted a unified circle rooted in loyalty, not loud bragging typical of early crews. The young men respected him, viewing him as someone holding a blueprint for success. Gerald Prince Miller stepped into that circle naturally through his connection to Kenneth, plus his willingness to enforce structure. Prince carried a fierce presence that other teens noticed almost immediately. Kenneth moved with strategic patience, planning each decision quietly behind the scenes. Prince pushed the crew physically, ensuring everyone followed instructions with exact precision. Their combination shaped the group far faster than anyone around them had expected. The early crew began small near Baisley courtyard benches, inside dim hallways where conversations avoided distractions. Kenneth explained that organization mattered far more than reckless hustle. He understood streets rewarded discipline, drilling that message repeatedly into his young circle. Prince enforced respect for rules, reminding them that mistakes could ruin everything before momentum truly formed. As crack demand climbed across Queens, Kenneth expanded the group's structure using layered roles, mirroring larger operations active throughout the city. He positioned lookouts near building entrances to monitor unmarked vehicles or uniformed officers moving through the night. Managers gathered earnings while tracking totals with quiet, practiced efficiency. Stash workers kept the product secured inside controlled apartments. Rooftop watchers remained stationed across Baisley houses, signaling warnings when trouble moved in from distant blocks. Each role operated smoothly because Kenneth demanded accountability from everyone involved. The teens appreciated that structure, following directions without hesitation or complaint. Prince enforced discipline through frequent position checks, correcting anyone who slipped into careless habits. That system allowed the product to move quickly through Baisley's lanes and side streets. Customers noticed the efficiency and returned regularly, carrying cash. People inside the project recognized that the crew operated differently from smaller hustlers, relying mostly on chance rather than planning. Kenneth relied on coded slang shaped by 5%er teachings to shield conversations from outsiders. Those phrases confused police units attempting to monitor activity closely. Officers overheard unusual terms sounding spiritual instead of criminal. The crew shared coded numbers and alphabet systems on rooftops, inside lobbies, through windows connecting apartments. Kenneth used that advantage, ensuring everyone mastered the coded structure precisely. The crack economy expanded at a pace that shocked many Southside families watching streets change daily. Money flooded Baisley Projects, turning teenagers into visible earners within short time frames. Residents noticed fresh sneakers, jewelry, loud laughter echoing from stairwells where young men counted cash. The shift felt sudden, fueling rumors about total earnings. Some whispered they moved hundreds daily initially. Others believed amounts doubled by the second month. Parents noticed new clusters of teens gathering around Kenneth and Prince. Some felt worried, yet stayed silent, shaped by past encounters with older hustlers. The crew's reputation grew quickly, causing neighbors to avoid involvement in disputes connected to them. Kenneth maintained a calm presence during those early years, sending messages without threats or confrontation. He rarely raised his voice, carrying confidence that quietly spread throughout the group. Police patrols around Guy Arche Brewer Boulevard increased after officers noticed increased foot traffic near certain Baisley entrances. Despite additional patrols, Kenneth's coded systems prevented officers from deciphering messages. Detectives tried to link voices to specific buyers or stash workers, but struggled due to the group's disciplined operations. Surveillance teams heard unfamiliar coded references that sounded like lessons rather than drug transactions. As months passed, the crew's profits soared, drawing interest from hustlers across nearby blocks who wanted to understand how such a young group operated so tightly. Kenneth focused on strengthening internal trust rather than expanding recklessly. Prince stayed alert and reminded everyone to guard information carefully. Their combined leadership created a protective force around the operation that made outsiders approach with caution. Customers queued discreetly along Baisley walkways while moving through the projects at a brisk pace once their deals were finished. Word traveled that the Baisley product moved quickly because of its strong quality. This placed the crew into a position of influence across South Jamaica. Even older hustlers noticed the change, while watching Kenneth's group from a distance with quiet curiosity nearby. More people across Southside began whispering the name Supreme Team after hearing teens describe themselves through coded exchanges quietly. The name stuck because of its link to Kenneth's 5%er roots, plus his growing presence as the group's planner. Prince accepted the title, then made sure everyone honored its meaning. The team carried themselves like a unit rather than scattered hustlers chasing luck. Requests for larger quantities reached Kenneth through trusted associates who approached respectfully to avoid offending Prince. Kenneth reviewed each request while keeping access limited to reduce unnecessary risk. The business expanded steadily as the Supreme Team built a reputation for structure that impressed veterans across South Jamaica. Hustlers in nearby complexes realized that Baisley operated differently, so many kept their distance to avoid conflict. With that rising influence came pressure that slowly tightened around the crew's daily routine. Kenneth noticed signs that greater dangers would soon follow while the streets shifted again. Prince sensed tension from rivals who watched Baisley with frustrated eyes nearby. The team understood their growth created new expectations. They also knew the crack era carried unpredictable dangers that could surface once money plus power rose fast. That creeping danger set the stage for a new chapter as the Supreme Team entered territory that demanded more protection, tighter control, plus strategies that matched the weight of their growing empire. The crack rush swept through Queens with unstoppable force once the Supreme Team tightened its early structure. Customers packed Baisley courtyards from sunrise through nightfall, hunting products that moved faster than anyone predicted. Profits reached levels that stunned even seasoned hustlers who believed they understood street money. Some mornings produced thousands before noon, while totals climbed higher as demand spread between neighboring buildings. Kenneth McGriff monitored everything with steady focus, keeping operations running smoothly throughout each day. He counted earnings with quiet confidence while studying patterns across several blocks to anticipate needs before shortages appeared. He knew momentum mattered more than flashy displays, maintaining strict discipline over movement plus supply. That discipline pushed profits toward jaw-dropping figures that shocked people across South Jamaica. To strengthen loyalty, Supreme handed out stacks to kids watching corners around the projects. He broke bills for mothers struggling with groceries, giving small amounts to older men near Baisley benches. Those gestures created admiration that moved quickly through the projects. Residents saw him as someone who cared about his environment, even while whispering about the scale of his growing enterprise. During this period, Supreme built a working relationship with Lorenzo Fat Cat Nichols, a known figure within Queens drug circles. Fat Cat ran a major network influencing large sections of Jamaica, holding deep ties to violent enforcers across several neighborhoods. Supreme recognized the value of linking with someone who understood the larger map. Their conversations opened access to resources that expanded distribution lines while providing support when tensions rose. Information flowed between their crews with surprising precision, strengthening both operations simultaneously. They exchanged knowledge about suppliers, police patterns, plus potential threats moving through Queens. Supreme respected Fat Cat's experience, watching closely how his network functioned across multiple housing complexes. That partnership strengthened both crews while shaping many decisions during early expansion. Trouble arrived when Fat Cat suspected Henry and Isaac Bolden of robbing his organization. The Bolden brothers ran their own operations, reportedly crossing paths with Fat Cat's business in costly ways. Supreme's nephew, Gerald Prince Miller, stepped in after Fat Cat requested help identifying the brothers' exact locations. Their search eventually led to corrupt connections inside the New York State Division of Parole. A parole officer, Jacqueline Jenkins, plus another employee, provided restricted addresses in exchange for a small fee. Prince reportedly paid for that information, receiving handwritten notes listing specific locations. Those notes later surfaced, during investigations, tying the Supreme team directly to the Bolden incidents. Isaac Bolden was shot near his mother's home following that exchange. Henry Bolden was later wounded in the Bronx under circumstances linked to those same details. These events revealed how far the Supreme team's influence extended beyond ordinary street encounters. They reached into government systems to locate rivals while protecting long-term interests. Investigators later traced the internal leak back to Perot employees, underscoring the organization's dangerous reach. The community heard whispers about the Bolden attacks, realizing that crossing the Supreme team carried serious consequences. Inside the crew, trust fractures emerged after signs of disloyalty surfaced among certain members. One episode involved James "Cat" Page, a longtime associate who once carried primary responsibilities. Rumors spread that he had begun sharing sensitive information with outsiders. Supreme viewed disloyalty as a threat capable of destroying everything built across Baisley and nearby blocks. Page became a target and was ultimately murdered during that internal conflict. His death showed the crew that loyalty was enforced seriously at every level. Members understood betrayal carried fatal consequences within the organization. That message traveled fast, tightening discipline across every layer. People who doubted the Supreme team's resolve learned that the group enforced order with absolute clarity. Young runners watched these moments unfold cautiously, adjusting their behaviors to meet expectations. Prince controlled movement across Baisley more aggressively than before, inspecting corners personally. The Supreme team expanded beyond Baisley as demand intensified across South Jamaica. They moved product into surrounding complexes with backing from figures linked to both Supreme and Fat Cat. Their operation followed predictable schedules that impressed older hustlers accustomed to loose routines. Supreme invested in securing multiple stash apartments to shield inventory from sudden raids. Rooftop watchers relayed coded phrases that kept movement smooth across extended distances. Detectives in Queens began spotting patterns separating the Supreme team from typical corner crews. The group maintained consistent quality, precise timing, unusual organization, traits linked to older crime families rather than teenagers from Baisley Projects. NYPD units within the 103rd Precinct logged increased foot traffic around select buildings. Undercover officers struggled to penetrate the group due to coded language and heavy reliance on rooftop watchers. FBI agents tracking narcotics distribution in New York City learned about the crew through informants detailing their methods. The structure appeared sophisticated enough to spark federal curiosity. Agents observed that the Supreme team operated with a hierarchy uncommon for street groups during the early crack years. Intelligence reports cited coded conversations resembling encrypted messages instead of common slang. Surveillance teams flagged Baisley houses as a central hub, generating earnings exceeding several Queens gangs combined. People across Southside Jamaica observed the group's evolution with mixed reactions. Some admired the discipline and success, others feared the expanding power displayed during daily movements. Parents warned children to avoid areas where Supreme's crew gathered near benches or pickup spots. Young members dressed sharply, carrying quiet confidence born from rising profits. Their presence commanded attention throughout the entire neighborhood. The mid-1980s became a period of rapid acceleration for the Supreme team. Expansion reached corners near Linden Boulevard, Sudafin Boulevard, plus sections around South Road. Their influence pushed outward, drawing smaller hustlers into orbit through respect or calculated pressure. Supreme oversaw that growth with strategic calmness. Prince ensured protection during risky stretches by reinforcing lookout positions. By this point, residents across Queens understood that the Supreme team no longer represented a small operation confined to Baisley Projects. They recognized it as a powerful entity shaping the drug economy across multiple neighborhoods. Those developments forced attention from law enforcement units preparing for long-term investigations. Momentum pushed the organization toward even larger territory. The empire grew heavier with every passing month, and the streets adjusted to the new force dominating the crack trade across South Jamaica. The next phase carried unpredictable tension that would reshape Queens and pull the Supreme Team deeper into violent territory. The Supreme Team's rapid rise drew attention from agencies that usually ignored neighborhood crews entirely. Detectives from the 103rd Precinct met narcotics investigators as Queens activity shifted at an alarming speed. Their reports described heavy movement around Baisley houses, plus controlled patterns, suggesting a serious network generating money daily. Those early observations pushed supervisors toward requesting federal support for a deeper investigation. Within months, a joint task force involving the NYPD, DEA, plus federal prosecutors began studying the group's widening footprint closely. Agents assembled detailed charts tracking crew members traveling between South Jamaica and nearby housing complexes. Surveillance units concentrated on stash apartments tied to the team, while undercover officers recorded license plates near known distribution locations. Investigators intercepted phone calls carrying coded language that confused newer agents unfamiliar with 5%er slang traditions. They documented movement near Guy R. Brewer Boulevard, watching rooftop lookouts signal runners with steady discipline. Patterns emerged, showing coordination that surpassed typical street-level operations seen elsewhere in Queens. The task force began targeting cars driven by known associates, logging routes traced across multiple borough corridors. Certain vehicles led investigators to mechanics in Hollis, where hidden compartments were installed for discreet product transport. Agents monitored older dealers connected to Fat Cat Nichols, since overlapping circles repeatedly pointed back toward Supreme's network. They reviewed every detail methodically, seeking to understand how the organization remained intact across several neighborhoods. Federal analysts noted the patience involved, recognizing the case required long observation before decisive action. By 1987, federal attention intensified after informants described large quantities of stored goods inside the Baisley apartments. One witness mentioned specific buildings where the product remained safe due to constant lookout presence. Another spoke about the group rotating stash locations every few days to avoid pattern recognition. These clues helped the task force plan a major raid targeting multiple units inside Baisley Projects. The raid unfolded early one morning in 1987 as officers stormed Baisley houses carrying helmets, shields, plus federal warrants. Residents woke to shouted commands echoing through stairwells while officers advanced with precision toward pre-identified doors. Teams kicked open apartments believed to contain large quantities of crack or bundled cash. They searched closets, vents, ovens, mattresses, furniture, probing every space for concealed stashes. Agents carried out bags filled with product plus weapons abandoned by crew members who escaped moments earlier. Supreme's counter-surveillance had already signaled trouble approaching due to unusual patrol patterns spotted by rooftop watchers. They noticed unmarked vehicles circling the projects repeatedly during the previous week. Supreme responded by shifting major products out of apartments targeted by investigators. His crew transported several packages to trusted locations outside Baisley the night before the raid. Officers realized that significant amounts had vanished before they arrived, leaving them frustrated at how quickly the team responded. Although the raid disrupted the operation, it did not entirely destroy it. Yet it produced enough evidence to support charges tying Supreme directly to the network. Federal agents arrested him in late 1987 on drug trafficking counts along with several associates linked to distribution. He faced significant charges that carried long prison terms if convicted at trial. Prosecutors pushed for a continuing criminal enterprise charge, describing him as a leader of a large-scale organization. Preme evaluated his options with legal counsel while carefully weighing evidence stacked heavily against him. Witness testimonies, seized drugs, plus financial patterns formed a serious case, likely producing a harsh sentence if challenged unsuccessfully. After long consideration, he chose to plead guilty to the continuing criminal enterprise charge. He accepted a sentence that removed him from Queens for several years. That decision shocked younger members who had viewed him as untouchable, shaped by years of visible success. Prince faced a separate federal case tied to violent acts involving the Bolden brothers, plus other incidents. Prosecutors connected him to shootings, retaliation plots, and conspiracies documented through witness accounts and parole officer testimony. The trial produced intense statements from individuals describing Prince's role in enforcing group rules across South Jamaica. Courtrooms heard details of discipline, fear, and control shaping daily operations. Several younger members linked to Prince received heavy sentences tied to conspiracy charges and violent enforcement actions. Prince ultimately received multiple life sentences alongside severe penalties imposed upon those associated closely with him. His removal triggered a major shift inside the Supreme team, since many runners depended on his direction. Mothers inside Baisley whispered about the massive sentences handed down, wondering whether the neighborhood might finally calm. Investigators celebrated the victory cautiously, recognizing influence still lingered across several blocks through the team's foundation. Preme waited for transfer into federal custody with calm acceptance shaped by reflection. He revisited years of strategy, success, loyalty, conflict, and chaos, defining South Jamaica during the crack era. His walk into federal prison marked the first true collapse of an organization built from teenage curiosity. The empire appeared bruised by arrests and long sentences, its image permanently altered. Still, traces of influence echoed across Queens, carried by memories, survivors, and younger associates admiring the system created during those intense years. Preme stepped out of federal custody in the mid-90s and returned to a Queens that looked nothing like the one he left. South Jamaica carried new apartment renovations, heavier patrols, fresh graffiti styles, and neighborhoods shaped by years of non-stop crack activity. Young crews that once followed his structure aged into older men holding memories of a past era. Younger hustlers barely knew his early reign, yet respected the stories told by older Southside voices. He moved slowly through Baisley Projects during those first days, carefully studying corners that once anchored his operation. Many familiar faces had vanished through prison terms, forced relocations, or violence tied to unresolved conflicts. Preme realized Queens had entered a different phase, shaped by hip-hop's rise, plus newer hustlers chasing rapid success. The neighborhood felt energized by changing culture and music scenes, creating unfamiliar opportunities across the city. That shift made the past feel distant, yet constantly present. During his adjustment period, Preme began expressing interest in building a legitimate future, driven by creativity rather than street economics. He connected with Irv Goldie Lorenzo, a South Jamaica native, gaining serious momentum inside the music industry. Irv respected Preme from childhood, understanding the weight carried by his name across Queens. Their conversations centered on film, storytelling, ambition, plus creating a lane highlighting street narratives without illegal involvement. Those exchanges planted a foundation for a venture that excited Preme more than previous hustles ever had. Irv introduced him to entertainment figures who recognized potential in a gritty film touching authentic Queens history. Preme embraced the idea, collecting scripts, concepts, treatment notes, plus early talent lists, shaping a possible production. He studied classic gangster films closely, learning pacing, visual rhythm, character development, and narrative tension. Gradually, he envisioned a project inspired by Donald Goines' novel Crime Partners, whose themes strongly mirrored personal experiences. That story became the blueprint for his rebranding effort, marking a deliberate turn toward legacy building. Preme formed Picture Perfect Films as his production company, later expanding into Picture Perfect Entertainment, overseeing multiple creative branches. He reached out to rappers, directors, plus actors drawn to the energy flowing out of Queens during that period. Preme believed the film world could offer a clean slate, creating distance from earlier activities. He presented himself as a businessman focused on telling authentic urban stories with discipline. That approach helped him gain early support from people who admired the transition. The music industry carried explosive momentum during that era, with artists from Queens and Brooklyn dominating national charts. Labels invested heavily in street-inspired projects, blending film concepts, soundtracks, branding, plus aggressive marketing campaigns. That environment created natural cover for Preme's ventures, since doors opened easily once names like Irv Gotti backed projects. Preme attended meetings across Manhattan where executives discussed budgets, visuals, partnerships, plus distribution strategies. He appeared positioned to launch an entirely new chapter. Crime Partners 2000 became his primary focus, with Preme pouring time into casting talks and financing strategies. Several high-profile artists committed to the film while contributing toward a strong accompanying soundtrack. His team secured equipment, scouted neighborhoods, mapped production schedules aligned with Queens locations. Preme enjoyed the process, speaking proudly about giving Southside stories an authentic voice. He planned for Picture Perfect to evolve into a lasting brand rooted in creative expression. However, parole officers monitored him closely and reviewed every move he made during this period. They noticed frequent contact with individuals connected to his old neighborhood and saw this as a violation of his conditions. Certain meetings triggered suspicion due to attendees linked to earlier cases. Parole officials also questioned some financial details surrounding the film project, which created additional scrutiny. These concerns triggered an investigation that examined his daily activities. Within a short period, parole violations were filed against him. Officers claimed he failed to follow guidelines related to associations and travel. The violations led to his return to federal custody, which halted his early progress in the entertainment world. Projects attached to his name stalled, and some investors backed away due to fear of legal complications. The excitement surrounding his transition faded quickly due to the sudden setback. Preme entered prison again with frustration, yet maintained focus on long-term plans rather than temporary obstacles. He studied movie production from inside confinement, writing detailed notes about distribution strategies for future projects. He contacted Irv Gotti regularly, discussing concepts he intended to execute once released. Preme believed his next move required more structure, stronger backing, plus sharper precision than before. He envisioned larger ventures spanning music, film, and legitimate partnerships, returning him to New York's creative spotlight. He sat inside his cell, mapping possibilities stretching far beyond Baisley houses or former boundaries. His thinking shifted toward expansion, investment planning, plus a carefully crafted image meant to reintroduce himself publicly. That planning period formed a foundation for another rise, pulling Queens toward a new era shaped by ambition, entertainment, and renewed street connections. Preme returned to Queens soil in 1997 with sharper intentions, plus a colder understanding of the world re-entered. Time inside provided long hours to rethink strategy while studying narcotics markets expanding across the East Coast in the mid-90s. He came back carrying a plan centered on wholesale weight rather than familiar corner sales. His focus shifted toward heroin plus cocaine distribution, moving through multiple states instead of one neighborhood. South Jamaica felt altered, yet his thinking aimed toward growth far beyond local turf. He avoided rebuilding the old Supreme Team framework because many former members remained incarcerated or completely disconnected. Instead, he sought fresh networks operating through tight secrecy with separate roles across multiple regions. Supreme moved quietly during this rebuilding phase, selecting individuals with proven discipline rather than neighborhood loyalty. He understood large-scale operations demanded that people follow instructions precisely without unnecessary improvisation. His strategy relied on controlled channels, layered communication, plus strict compartmentalization throughout every tier. Baltimore emerged as an early target city because of its active heroin market during the late 1990s. Intelligence reports showed strong demand alongside limited competition from efficient suppliers operating locally. Supreme identified contacts capable of distributing weight across Baltimore neighborhoods without drawing immediate suspicion. He created a flow-moving product from New York to Maryland using couriers traveling Interstate 95 at staggered intervals. Each courier received instructions to avoid patterns that could alert highway patrol units. This system produced steady profits, pushing him toward stronger expansion plans. North Carolina later joined the pipeline as Supreme identified Charlotte plus Raleigh as developing cocaine markets. He moved product through drivers carrying shipments inside hidden compartments installed by trusted mechanics. Those drivers maintained clean profiles while rarely staying in the same hotels on consecutive trips. Supreme monitored performance through coded messages relayed by middlemen supervising deliveries discreetly. His approach depended heavily on trust built through repeated tests confirming reliability. Consistency earned rewards while nervous habits resulted in immediate removal. Victor Wright emerged as a critical figure during this expansion phase. He understood logistics deeply and possessed the patience required for careful interstate operations. Supreme valued his steady ability to manage stash locations, schedule couriers, and oversee supplies without drawing attention. Wright secured apartments across Queens where bulk shipments rested briefly before wider distribution. These stash houses relied on coded entry systems, while tenants rotated frequently to prevent recognizable patterns from forming. He supervised packaging stages that converted large quantities into smaller sealed bundles prepared for discreet transportation. Wright also tracked timing carefully, ensuring no location stayed active long enough to attract suspicion. Interstate couriers operated under rigid guidelines, limiting knowledge beyond assigned responsibilities. Supreme believed secrecy shielded the operation from infiltration or leaks, triggering investigations. Couriers sometimes transported product using rental vehicles, swapped weekly to erase connection trails between states. Supreme required couriers to maintain low profiles while avoiding bars, clubs, or crowded locations. Their focus remained on travel efficiency, delivery precision, and immediate returns to New York. Any deviation raised concern, reinforcing discipline across every route. Money laundering became essential once profits reached substantial levels spanning multiple regions. Supreme viewed Murder Inc. as a legitimate channel for generating revenue through music-related transactions. Irv Gotti's label produced major hits while maintaining powerful industry relationships during that era. Supreme invested heavily in studio sessions, soundtrack projects, and early film planning. Those investments blended naturally with the entertainment boom shaping New York hip-hop during the late 90s. Financial records flowed through companies accustomed to handling large budgets regularly. This structure helped shield suspicious sums from immediate scrutiny while normalizing extraordinary cash movement. Music studios across Manhattan hosted meetings where Supreme discussed business moves under the guise of creative planning. He attended soundtrack sessions for projects that connected to upcoming films and albums. Executives assumed his presence reflected investment interests rather than deeper intentions. Supreme appeared comfortable in these rooms and used that environment to mask his broader activities. He traveled with industry figures to award shows and label gatherings that kept attention focused on entertainment rather than narcotics activity. The illusion of legitimacy grew stronger as Crime Partners 2000 moved forward with production discussions. Supreme used film meetings to explain trips, phone calls, and transfers connected to the operation. He presented himself as a businessman preparing for a major rollout involving soundtracks, studio partnerships, and distribution plans. People inside the industry respected him and welcomed his presence because of Irv Gotti's influence. His dual life created an elaborate shield that blended street power with entertainment credibility. However, lower-level workers felt heavy pressure due to the consequences attached to mistakes. Supreme eliminated individuals suspected of stealing product, speaking loosely, or leaking details about transportation routes. Stories spread across Queens and Baltimore about workers who vanished after questionable behavior. Those incidents created fear that kept the operation disciplined and silent. People knew Supreme valued order above everything. They understood that errors threatened the entire pipeline, stretching across several states. Some couriers whispered concerns about federal agents monitoring Interstate 95 closely during the late 1990s. Others noticed increased patrols near certain rest stops used during routine trips. Yet nobody wanted to bring these observations directly to Supreme unless the evidence felt undeniable. Workers feared that expressing too much worry looked suspicious. They followed instructions and hoped route adjustments would occur naturally through leadership decisions. Federal investigators across New York, Maryland, and North Carolina started noticing unusual patterns involving multiple suspects linked to Queens. Their systems flagged deposits, wire transfers, phone records, and suspicious vehicles appearing near distribution hubs. DEA units in Baltimore received anonymous tips about heroin suppliers with New York connections. North Carolina investigators tracked rental cars linked to Queens residents traveling through Raleigh during significant seizures. These independent clues eventually pointed toward a larger network operating with strategic control. Agents launched surveillance operations targeting associates who traveled frequently between states. They monitored payphones in Queens used by middlemen communicating with couriers. Investigators gathered hotel receipts, rental contracts, and toll booth footage to connect movements along I-95. Each detail added another piece to a puzzle, slowly revealing Supreme's covert expansion. The entertainment industry continued embracing Supreme due to his role in film development and music collaborations. Many people saw him as a respected investor with ties to Murder, Inc. They attended meetings with him and saw a calm businessman discussing creative opportunities. They rarely questioned the financial resources behind his investments. This dual image enabled him to move with greater freedom than typical suppliers. Tension grew steadily across the pipeline as federal attention increased. Investigators from multiple states met to compare notes and discovered overlapping names, phone numbers, and addresses. They realized the network extended far beyond local dealers. Supreme's operation entered their radar with growing clarity as each detail linked back to Queens. The stage is now prepared for a new collision involving law enforcement pressure, rising suspicion inside the operation, and an entertainment empire unknowingly intertwined with a major narcotics network. Curtis 50 Cent Jackson grew up in South Jamaica, absorbing stories whispered across street corners plus weathered project benches. He hustled along Guy R. Brewer Boulevard as a young teen, watching older men move weight with disciplined precision. His childhood echoed with names rooted deeply in Queens history, including Preme and Prince, whose reputation still carried influence across Baisley and nearby blocks. 50 developed a sharp understanding of Southside politics long before entering recording studios. His lyrics reflected those experiences with blunt honesty, drawing early attention from devoted mixtape listeners. During the late 1990s, 50 recorded a track titled Get a Quran, detailing Queens legends plus their alleged roles within street operations. That song referenced Kenneth Supreme McGriff and Gerald Prince Miller directly by name. He repeated stories passed through generations that many locals recognized immediately. The track circulated through mixtapes, reaching ears across South Jamaica quickly. Reactions turned intense because no rapper had spoken those names so plainly before. The record spread block to block, landing inside barbershops, car trunks, and corner gatherings. Some listeners admired 50's boldness when hearing those narratives spoken openly. Others felt uneasy as street histories appeared documented with unsettling clarity. Older Southside residents understood the power attached to those names, realizing the song invited friction. Debates followed over whether it crossed dangerous lines by dragging private stories into public spaces. Rumors spread that figures tied to those histories viewed the track as disrespectful or unwanted exposure. Younger hustlers whispered quietly about consequences tied to mentioning legends openly. Tensions surrounding Ghetto Quran intensified monthly as more listeners learned the lyrics. 50's rising presence complicated matters since his reputation expanded across mixtape circles. Momentum built quickly, attracting major label interest that pushed him closer toward national visibility. However, his name carried street associations, making certain executives uneasy. They monitored reactions inside Queens closely, recognizing potential conflict forming quietly behind the scenes. On May 24, 2000, 50 was shot outside his grandmother's home in South Jamaica. He was hit 9 times during the attack, which shocked the entire borough. The shooting occurred near her house on 161st Street, where he often visited family. Neighbors heard rapid fire followed by screams that echoed across the block. 50 survived the attack but suffered serious injuries requiring extensive recovery. The streets erupted with speculation about the motive and individuals possibly involved. Many discussions linked the shooting to tensions created after Ghetto Quran circulated heavily. News of the shooting spread through Queens within hours. Hustlers, rappers, and residents analyzed every detail available. Some believed the attack warned others to avoid revealing history through music. Others claimed the incident sent a message to the industry regarding certain boundaries. Police investigated but never secured a conviction tied to the shooting. Rumors continued circulating without clear answers. 50 recovered slowly and, years later, discussed the event with a calmness that surprised many people. During this period, whispers surfaced that some labels considered 50 too risky to sign. Executives feared involvement in conflicts connected to Queens figures with heavy reputations. These concerns created an informal industry blacklist that temporarily blocked opportunities for him. Some insiders claim that pressure influenced these decisions. 50 spoke about those struggles in interviews, explaining how doors closed due to fears surrounding his name. Jam Master Jay played a major role in keeping 50's career alive during this tense period. Jay signed him to JMJ Records, then guided him through recovery while patiently teaching industry structure. Jay believed deeply in his potential, providing studio space, production resources, plus steady mentorship. He shielded 50 professionally, encouraging sharper writing during a season when major labels avoided contact entirely. Their bond strengthened through those years, shaping 50's discipline, outlook, and early artistic development significantly. Jay also helped him rebuild confidence slowly, reminding him that survival alone did not define long-term success. As 50 rebuilt momentum, the street still felt unsettled around his growing presence. People recognized his rise carried tension tied to unresolved conflicts lingering quietly beneath success. His music turned more aggressive, while confidence returned faster than many expected. He carried scars from the shooting, yet refused to move carefully or shrink from himself. His mixtapes reached wider audiences, spreading rapidly across multiple boroughs through word of mouth. His voice grew louder as he crafted songs centered on survival, betrayal, ambition, and hardened resolve. Fear lingered around him since unknown figures still viewed him as a looming threat. He attended appearances cautiously, traveling with trusted friends who understood the danger shaping each movement. He never relaxed fully, even as fame accelerated faster than security could follow. Industry insiders noticed tension shadowing meetings, studio sessions, promotional stops, plus live performances. Still, his talent kept pushing forward, pulling him deeper into the spotlight. That momentum eventually guided him towards Shady Records, then Aftermath Entertainment, where opportunity finally matched his intensity. This feud impacted Murder Inc., as 50's presence clashed indirectly with Supreme's deep influence in Irv Gotti's world. Rumors of friction between the camps and the tension attracted unwanted attention from investigators already studying financial ties between Supreme and Murder Inc. The feud's energy darkened the atmosphere around the label, creating pressure that grew heavier as 50's fame expanded. That pressure eventually helped draw Murder Inc. into the sights of federal prosecutors who had already closely monitored Supreme's operations. Black Just held a special place in Supreme's life since their bond stretched deep through South Jamaica's history. They grew up around the same blocks, learned similar lessons, and navigated the same tensions across Baisley houses. People in Queens viewed Black just as someone who moved with confidence and handled situations with quiet toughness. Supreme respected him greatly and valued his loyalty, which shaped many early decisions. Their connection represented something personal rather than business. Residents across Southside mentioned both names together whenever discussing their younger years. In 1999, Black Just was murdered in a Queens parking area after a heated encounter. News of the killing traveled across Baisley Projects extremely fast. People gathered near storefronts and bus stops, discussing the loss with stunned voices. Some older residents shook their heads, knowing how rare it was for someone like Black Just to fall unexpectedly. Younger hustlers felt the impact instantly, recognizing how much he meant to Supreme. The death sent shockwaves through several neighborhoods tied to their shared history. Supreme absorbed the news with controlled fury, an emotion he had restrained carefully for many years. He listened to details surrounding the killing without interruption, then withdrew from public spaces completely. Neighbors noticed him moving with a colder presence throughout those tense days. People sensed something heavy had shifted inside him permanently. Rumors spread suggesting a forceful response was coming, though he spoke very little publicly. He studied events closely, reaching out only to trusted associates who understood his thinking. Supreme quietly assembled a small group he believed capable of executing a precise retaliation mission. He chose individuals experienced with surveillance techniques, stolen vehicles, plus coordinated movement across Queens. He wanted the operation to remain silent without drawing immediate attention. None of these men came from his original Supreme team, since many remained incarcerated. Each participant understood the stakes clearly and followed instructions without hesitation. Their focus centered entirely on one target, Eric E. Moneybags Smith. E. Moneybags held a strong reputation across Queens, connected to figures throughout Long Island and Brooklyn. He rapped, hustled, and circulated through music circles tied to several New York neighborhoods. His name surfaced repeatedly during discussions surrounding Black Just's killing, placing him squarely in Supreme's sights. Whether he pulled the trigger mattered little to Supreme personally. His presence during the incident marked him as responsible enough for revenge. The squad tracked his movements for weeks, refining a plan matching Supreme's demand for precision. On July 16, 2001, E Moneybags attended a gathering near a Queens block crowded with people enjoying warm weather. He arrived in a white GMC Suburban, parking close to friends who greeted him casually without drawing attention. The surveillance team spotted him quickly, then alerted the rest of the crew through practice signals. Two men approached the truck wearing gloves, moving fast before anyone nearby grasped what unfolded. They unleashed a hail of bullets through the windows, striking E Moneybags repeatedly within seconds. Witnesses screamed, scattering in panic as the attackers retreated toward a waiting vehicle. Chaos followed, leaving the block frozen between confusion, fear, and sudden silence. E Moneybags died inside his truck, leaving the scene soaked in shock, disbelief, and lingering dread. People whispered that Supreme ordered the hit because of Black Just's earlier murder. The killing added another heavy chapter to Queens' history, as tensions rose across several surrounding neighborhoods. Rap circles discussed the shooting quietly, avoiding statements that might provoke further instability or retaliation. The violence reminded many residents that old connections still shaped present conflicts, regardless of changing times. After E Moneybags' death, Supreme's attention shifted toward Troy Singleton, widely known as Big Nose Troy. Supreme viewed him as someone capable of seeking revenge for E Moneybags without hesitation. Troy carried a reputation for retaliatory behavior, holding strong ties within Queens' street networks. Supreme worried that delaying action would increase the risk for individuals close to him. The squad shadowed Troy, carefully analyzing his routines around South Jamaica during different hours. They observed which streets he favored, which friends he visited often, mapping patterns that hinted at future moves. Investigators later learned that members of the hit squad shot Troy in the Bronx during a targeted attack. He died from multiple gunshot wounds that matched patterns seen in the E Moneybags murder. Detectives initially treated the incidents separately since they occurred in different boroughs. However, whispers across Queens suggested deeper connections linking both killings. Street rumors referenced Supreme's involvement, though no direct evidence surfaced immediately. Detectives studying both murders reviewed surveillance footage, shell casings, and witness interviews. They discovered a stolen minivan used during the E Moneybags attack that was registered under a false identity at a rental location. Phone records revealed unusual call patterns between Queens and Long Island on the nights leading up to both shootings. Witnesses described vehicles circling blocks shortly before each attack. These small details helped investigators form clearer timelines that raised suspicions about coordinated planning. Detectives interviewed individuals who regularly interacted with E Moneybags. Some mentioned long-standing conflicts tied to Southside figures. Others recalled arguments involving Black Just's death. These clues pushed investigators to question whether the murders represented a chain reaction rather than isolated incidents. They broadened their search to include names associated with Supreme and his newer circle of associates. The investigation expanded as more fragments pointed toward organized retaliation. Investigators then compared notes from homicide units across Queens, Brooklyn, and the Bronx. They noticed links involving shell cars used by multiple shooters and repeated use of prepaid phones traced to temporary addresses. These discoveries raised alarms among federal agents who already monitored Supreme for narcotics activity and financial irregularities. They realized that the murder suggested a network capable of executing coordinated hits. The scale appeared larger than typical neighborhood disputes. Detectives grew convinced that the violence signaled a wider criminal ecosystem operating beneath entertainment ventures and interstate distribution routes. Their focus shifted toward unraveling connections across music studios, stash locations, and street-level associates. Each clue pushed them deeper into a complex web of business ties and personal loyalties. The next phase of the investigation would expose far more than 2 murders, dragging multiple industries and networks into the federal spotlight. The investigation surrounding Supreme expanded rapidly once detectives linked the murders of E. Moneybags and Troy Singleton to wider narcotics activity. Federal agencies compared files from Baltimore, New York, plus North Carolina, connecting distribution networks to financial trails across several companies. DEA agents examined seized heroin samples, phone logs, courier movements, and apartment leases tied directly to stash houses. Homicide units added interviews, vehicle descriptions, rental histories, and shell casing matches gathered from multiple crime scenes. IRS investigators reviewed wiring patterns, deposits, along with transfers associated with entertainment ventures connected to Murder Inc. Every agency shared intelligence that increasingly pointed toward a single network quietly controlled by Supreme behind the scenes, avoiding attention. Prosecutors assembled detailed charts linking murders, drug shipments, shell vehicles, burner phones, as well as laundering patterns across years. Several cooperating witnesses outlined courier systems used to move product efficiently across multiple state lines. Others claimed Supreme directed retaliation missions following Black Justice's murder, issuing instructions through trusted intermediaries. Surveillance teams tracked individuals meeting known Murder Inc. employees during routine business hours. They captured images of Supreme entering buildings used for label operations, exiting meetings involving film or soundtrack discussions. Those visuals strengthened theories that entertainment companies provided reliable financial cover for illegal transactions. By late 2002, the case reached a point where federal action appeared unavoidable. Agents secured warrants to search Murder Inc.'s Manhattan headquarters, a central location for meetings involving Irv Gotti and artists. Investigators believe Supreme used the label to launder earnings through recording budgets, film investments, and soundtrack expenses. Analysts reviewed contracts for Crime Partners 2000, tracing payments back to individuals linked with narcotics activity. Prosecutors argued these financial channels concealed money earned through heroin and cocaine distribution, masking criminal profits as legitimate entertainment revenue. On January 3, 2003, federal agents raided Murder Inc.'s Broadway office in Manhattan. Officers entered the building early in the morning, seizing computers, financial records, contracts, as well as hard drives from multiple offices. Employees stood frozen in disbelief as agents removed boxes filled with ledgers, invoices, and detailed budget records. News cameras arrived within minutes while reporters broadcast updates nationwide without pause. The raid signaled a dramatic shift for hip-hop, since Murder Inc. remained among the era's most powerful labels. Artists like J. Rule and Ashanti watched events unfold with concern over potential career fallout. Investigators relied on pager messages, two-way communications, and recorded calls to strengthen their expanding case. These communications referenced meetings, cash transfers, and coded instructions tied directly to violent actions. Some logs mentioned associates traveling between boroughs shortly before specific targeted killings occurred. Others captured conversations suggesting retaliation for earlier incidents within connected circles. Prosecutors argued these exchanges demonstrated Supreme's role in planning acts linked to murder and narcotics trafficking. Those records became central evidence once federal indictments were fully formed, A superseding indictment charged Supreme with multiple counts involving heroin distribution, murder for hire, firearms violations, and conspiracy. The filing listed E. Moneybags killing, Troy Singleton's death, alongside narcotics activity tied to interstate shipments. Prosecutors added money laundering charges connected to Murder Inc. and Picture Perfect business entities. The document portrayed Supreme as the architect of a violent network disguised as entertainment ventures. His position appeared central across every primary offense detailed throughout the indictment. Irv and Chris Lorenzo faced charges involving money laundering, along with financial support linked to Supreme's operations. Their trial drew intense media focus due to Murder Inc.'s cultural prominence. Celebrities, artists, and executives filled the courtroom regularly, signaling loyalty toward the brothers. The atmosphere carried energy resembling high-profile entertainment events rather than standard proceedings. Reporters crowded hallways daily, waiting for testimony updates or cross-examination moments. Witnesses described business arrangements, soundtrack budgets, as well as loans connected to numerous film projects. The prosecution attempted to show the Lorenzos knowingly cleaned narcotics money through their successful record label. The defense countered that Irv and Chris merely maintained friendships with Supreme, rooted deeply in shared Queens history. They insisted the brothers invested in films and music without awareness of the illegal origins behind certain funds. Their legal team emphasized entertainment industry norms where private investors regularly financed creative ventures. Jurors appeared persuaded by defense arguments, ultimately acquitting both brothers after extended deliberation. Their acquittal sparked applause from supporters seated quietly inside the gallery. Supreme did not benefit from similar momentum as proceedings moved forward relentlessly. Prosecutors pursued the harshest penalties available, citing multiple murder charges alongside serious narcotics counts. They argued his leadership role made him eligible for the federal death penalty. The government prepared witnesses describing involvement in violent acts and large-scale distribution operations. They planned to present phone records, rental histories, financial trails, vehicle traces, and testimonies from former associates. Supreme's legal position deteriorated steadily as each witness added another layer to the narrative. His attorneys pushed back aggressively by challenging credibility issues surrounding cooperating witnesses. They argued that several witnesses sought reduced sentences, therefore fabricating details to satisfy prosecutors. They attempted to separate entertainment ventures from broader criminal accusations tied to violence. They maintained that Supreme invested legitimately in film production, following established industry standards. However, the government's evidence appeared extensive, directly linking several events to his decision-making. The combination of witness accounts, forensic matches, and financial trails significantly intensified pressure surrounding the case. Supreme entered the courtroom for his most dangerous trial with a calm expression that masked the seriousness of the situation. He understood that every detail presented during the proceedings carried immense weight. The stakes included life-altering penalties that permanently shaped his future. As he sat before the jury, the long history of South Jamaica, the music industry, and multi-state narcotics networks converged into one defining moment. The trial set the stage for the final turning point in the legendary rise and fall of Kenneth Supreme McGriff. Supreme's final trial unfolded with prosecutors presenting witnesses who tied him to murders, heroin shipments, and financial channels stretching through multiple states. Jurors listened as former associates described stash houses, retaliation missions, coded calls, and interstate couriers. Agents displayed records connecting addresses, vehicles, and burner phones linked to the operation. Testimony painted a picture of a leader controlling violent decisions and major weight distribution. The government pushed for death, arguing that Supreme built an empire fueled by fear and discipline. His attorneys countered with challenges to his credibility and argued that entertainment ventures were legitimate work. They argued that cooperators exaggerated details to reduce their own sentences. The jury eventually convicted him on several counts, yet they failed to agree on execution unanimously. Supreme received life without parole and left the courtroom surrounded by deputies. He entered federal prison for the final time with a quiet expression shaped by decades of victories, losses, and consequences. Interviews recorded later captured reflections on loyalty, history, and choices that shaped Queens. His name still echoed through Southside conversations, rap lyrics, and documentaries discussing the era that defined an entire generation. The legend remained larger than the cell he occupied, carried through stories told by people who witnessed his rise long before investigators uncovered his fall.